Human design can be quite a heady kind of a system. It can be very complex. There's thousands of little rabbit holes to go down, but really its core intention is to reorient ourselves to our bodies. It's meant to be so absolutely liberating. It's meant to give you permission to be yourself, but it also takes enormous amounts of courage. When you want to be yourself, when you want to unhook from the program, it's literally like that scene in The Matrix where they have to do this whole mission and they have to get in and infiltrate through the machines, and then they're like pulling out these tubes and everything. It's like unhooking from, it literally is like that. My biggest prayer is that, really liberate yourself and that you can become, have the courage to know how unique and how beautiful and how special you are.
Hi, welcome to The Way of the Heart. Today's episode is with Rakai'el Webb. She is an expert in astrology, human design, and gene keys. And we actually share a very unique past life memory, which is actually the way that we met. We talk about all of these topics in today's episode, and I had so many more questions for her that I'm really hoping that we have a second part to this episode in the future. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Rakai'el, welcome to The Way of the Heart.
Thank you so much for having me, Natalia. Such an honor to be here.
It is a pleasure for me to have you here. I admire your work. The way that I found you is very interesting, but I think that could be shared in a different story. Today I want to really bring to the listeners your expertise. There are so many beautiful systems and modalities that you are an expert in, and that I think a lot of people would benefit from learning from your work. I do want to share, before we dive deep into that, a little bit, just a tiny little story context of how we met. And I think it would be a gift for people to know that we met last year in a magical way that I still, to this day, I'm like, how did that happen? That was beautiful. So before we dive deep into astrology, human design, and gene keys, I would love if you can share with the audience about the school that you used to run. I believe you used to run, you don't run it anymore, where I initially met you online.
The school that I ran for 7 years is called the Lemuria School of Remembering. And that was actually a gift that came from my Jupiter return. I was in a coffee shop here in Maui and ran into my astrology teacher. And he, of course, we sat down and started chatting, and he was looking at my chart, and he was like, there's something that you had an idea for that, was kind of combining a bunch of different things that you have been really passionate about for a long time. And it's really important for you to not miss that opportunity and to bring that forward. Because at that point, my Jupiter return had already completed. And Jupiter was retrograde, so he was kind of going back towards that same place. And so he was like, this is something really important for you. And I knew exactly what it was in that moment. I had wanted to do a retreat where everyone would come here and we would do everything I wanted to do. Like all the things, because I have a lot of different things that I'm interested in. And so I wanted everyone to sleep, close to the earth and commune with the stars and uh, talk about astrology and connect with the waters and make flower essences together and dress up as our most magical selves and like all of these things that I really loved. And I was not ready to do that in person because I had been, had an online business for several years before that. So doing things in person felt a little bit intimidating to me, but I was like, oh, I could go ahead and do this in an online kind of format. And so I started writing out kind of my dream journey that I would, go on with whoever was interested in this kind of stuff as well. And and all of that was really also based on my own journey because that's of course why I was called to move to Maui was for past life remembrance, for Lemurian past life remembrance. Um, as a child, it was, I grew up in Kentucky, which doesn't seem very fantastical. But I was really, really lucky in that my parents were very like spiritually oriented. My mom was always telling us about the fairies that were in the garden. And my dad was very much into all types of spirituality and then got very into Native American spirituality. We ended up going to a reservation when I was probably 12. But it was I was always in the water. My mom taught me to swim when I was 3 months old, and we went down to Florida, so I really knew all of this Atlantean energy, and that's a whole 'nother story that I've told many times about, like, how and why I moved to Maui, um, but, that, I never before I teach or share about anything, I really like for it to be really, really embodied so that I don't have to study, I don't have to make notes, I don't have to prepare. It's just like it's in me and I can just open my mouth and it comes out. And um, so that had been my experience and my path was really doing a lot of past life work and past life remembering, probably since around maybe like 2013. And it was 2016 when I moved here, and then 2017 when the school came forward. And then the school developed into many different levels. And it was this whole structure, and it was something that was very beautiful. And we have so many amazing students and people from all over the world, all different age ranges, all different walks of life. It's one of the most colorful, beautiful groups of people. And I'm just really so grateful to have had that opportunity to share that experience.
For those who are listening that may not know what Lemuria is, can you briefly give us an explanation of what Lemuria is without getting into all of the details, which are amazing, but just because we want to focus on the systems?
Yeah. So I always start with Atlantis because most people are familiar with Atlantis, or the Bermuda Triangle. There's something mysterious under the water, this ancient civilization in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And so, similarly, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there was also another continent at or before the time of Atlantis, and a similar advanced civilization, very, very heart centered, very connected to nature. And even, here in Hawaii, it's, we have Mauna Kea, which is the tallest volcano on the Big Island. And actually, it when you measure from base to summit, it's actually the tallest mountain in the world, but the base is 10,000 feet underwater. And so, so really Mauna Kea is 23,000 feet tall. And so, but when we consider that the base of that mountain is 10,000 feet underwater, it's like, well, what else is down there? Like I live at the base of Haleakala now. And so, you think about the town and all the land and the schools and everything that's here right now. Like if all of that is 10,000 feet underwater, like, whole civilization there. So there's many, many people who have, this connection to what feels like a more ancient, nature-oriented, compassionate way of relating to one another and to the earth. And many of those people also have, a real magnetism to water, but also a very deep fear of water. Because there was a time when, we're familiar with the story of Atlantis where the island sank and it was kind of violent. Usually there's a story around, technological experimentation and things like that. And the story, there's many different perspectives. Lemuria was a large continent that existed for a long time. So for me, what my truth is that in Lemuria, people knew that the vibration and the frequency that we held at that time was incompatible with the lessons that humanity needed to go through in the fall. And so we actually chose to vibrate out of this dimension. Some people did not choose to do that, so they decided to attach themselves into stones or into other organic material, oftentimes stones, so that they could stay in this dimension. But a lot of people, or a lot of beings, vibrated out of that frequency and even moved on to Atlantis or on to ancient Egypt or different other indigenous cultures in the world. Because Lemurian frequencies are very, very widespread throughout many different cultures all over the world.
So the way that I met you was by joining the first level of the school, which was Remembering Lemuria. So basically the practices that we studied were so that we could remember, I guess, and bring back that frequency of those times, which I found fascinating. And the way that I got to you is like a whole other story of synchronicities on my end. Other type of synchronicities, not the one that I'm going to share in a little bit of how we met in person. But every single thing that has connected me to Lemuria has been through a synchronicity, which is, to me, is the most valid, or like the most validation I could have of something that is so real. And like you said, my truth, right? Like this is my story and my experience. But the frequency of Lemuria seems to show up for me in these magical ways that I couldn't ignore anymore. And that's when I started to look for, okay, how can I learn more about Lemuria? And then I found your work and I found you had a school. And like, it was like 2 weeks after that you were opening the registration for Remembering Lemuria. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm in. Like, I want to know everything about it. So it was a beautiful experience for me. And then months later, because I think that was 2022 when I joined. I don't know, time is not my best thing when I look back. But last year, I went to Hawaii, and my husband is usually the one that plans our trips. So I knew I was going to be in Maui, and I knew you lived in Maui. So I reached out to you to see if we could meet up so we could meet in person. And by the time that we got to Maui, I never responded to you. My husband had planned every single minute of our trip, and usually he's amazing at doing that. So to me, it was so overwhelming. I just got caught up in like just traveling and like leaving everything ready, and I never got back to you. So we never really agreed on anything to meet up or anything. But then we were in Maui, finally in our vacations. And we had 1 day left in Maui. And my husband was like, oh, you know what? We actually don't have anything planned for tomorrow. And I was like, oh, okay. He said this during a small tour guide that we were doing in a small coffee, like a coffee farm. And the guide, I asked the guy, I was like, so what do you recommend? Like, what do you like doing in Maui? And he said, oh, I like going to, I can't even remember the name of the mountain. But he said, I like going there. The air is like the most pure air that you can ever breathe. I love going there. And we actually hadn't done that. So I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So we get in the car and I grab my phone and I pick the time. I buy the tickets for the whole family to go, which this detail is important because I never do this in my family. Never. Not once I've done that. I've never bought tickets. I've never picked what to do. It's always my husband. It's always someone else. And I just go along with it. So anyways, the next day comes. We go to this mountain, the time that I picked. When we're there, we go to this observatory and my husband wants to go off in like one of the trails that was not open to the public. And we're going back and forth because I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. Like, I think we should respect the, the nature. Like if the locals don't want us to go there, like, I don't think we should go there. And he's like, oh, but a lot of people are doing it, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. We're going back and forth for like 30 minutes. I go back to the car, like we go back up until finally he's like, okay, we're not going to do it if you don't feel comfortable. So we go down this trail. And there was kind of like an open trail that was not the main, I guess, from like that place. And a lot of people were going there. So we kept going deep in the mountain. And I really wanted to get in the water. So we found a beautiful spot. We get in the water. My husband and I are in the water. I'm like literally like floating in the water, just looking at the sky. And I get this like random, not so random. It's not like I never feel this, but I was like, I want chips. so I was like, I think we have chips in the backpack. So I stop floating. I get out of the water. I go to the backpack, which was like a few feet away from where we were. And as I'm grabbing the chips from the backpack, I look up and I see a woman walking. I'm not seeing the face, I should say at this moment. I'm not seeing your face. I'm just seeing the back of your body, like your hair, and you had a backpack. And in that moment, I knew that it was you. I was like, that is Rakai'el. And I started yelling at you, basically, but you immediately turned. And it was like, we were just like, hi. I mean, how is this happening? Like we didn't plan it in this random spot, like deep in the mountain after so many things that I went back and forth with my husband after I was literally floating a few seconds before. If I hadn't got an app to get chips out of my backpack, I would have never seen you. It was just like so incredible. And then you were like, yeah, hi. And I was just like, wow, this is the most beautiful meetup I've ever had. And once again, it was another validation on top of all of the Lemurian synchronicities and connections that I've had, that I was like, okay, this is beautiful. And the fact that it's happening in Maui, it's even more like magical. So yeah. So following your heart is also following your intuition to grab those chips from the bag.
Totally. Yeah, no, and it was so funny on my part because I was on a mission because I was there to cleanse these crystals, and it was just like I was like, okay, like I was kind of like work. I was working, and I'm coming down this path, and usually like, it's like I try to avoid people and stuff, and then I heard you yelling, and I was like, oh, this seems like she's lost her kid or something. She's just yelling in the middle of the jungle. And then I saw you and I was like, oh, it's you.
To this day, I have the exact memory of the moment that we just like saw each other in the eye. Like I still close my eyes and I see us kind of like yeah, I see us in the middle of the jungle, because it was also beautiful. The setting, like, it couldn't have been more perfect, like more Lemurian than that. We cannot get more Lemurian than that. Like, just in the middle of this beautiful jungle next to the water, the river or the creek, whatever it was. Like, it was just amazing. So yeah, I knew in that moment that there was a special connection too, which is also the reason why I wanted to have you here, because I know you have a beautiful gift. And I would love for more people to hear you and to receive what it is that you're here to give in this lifetime.
Thank you.
With that context and having a good foundation of what Lemuria is, I think like we can start diving into the astrology system, human design, and gene keys. And I think it's a good maybe like opener for the listeners that perhaps are not familiar at all with anything that we're talking about, and this is completely new to them. We've been talking about Lemuria. We've been talking about remembering and reconnecting with like these frequencies. And in a way, what I would say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're coming from a place of understanding that we reincarnate. And this is not our first lifetime. Our soul is here with a specific mission. And a lot of these different systems that we're going to be talking about help us understand that mission of our soul. So I think that we can start with astrology.
If it's all right with you, just to kind of like tie it all together, from that, that part of my life, and then, moving into this part of my life. Because for me, of course, it is exactly as you said, because astrology was a part of the curriculum for remembering Lemuria, and it continued to be part of what we would study through Rising Lemuria and through Lemurian leadership. Because I do feel like that astrology helps us to live more in harmony with the natural world, and also to really have a wider perspective where we're taking into consideration other things than what's happening on the earth. To have this much broader perspective, to feel like we're, a galactic family, that it's like, we're part of this solar system that has these planets, that's in this galaxy. But making it, it really is this kind of, for me, it feels like this, another layer of the spiral of my own remembering, in shifting away from the Lemurian work into really focusing on these systems. Because for me, in my own, in my remembering journey, and, my Lemurian journey and everything, that was really about remembering things from beyond this lifetime and piecing them together to really feel like I belonged here. And then, I've been studying astrology since I was 17 in 1998, and got deeper into it in 2013. And in 2015, I was started mentoring with my first two teachers, Harry Gallagher and Christine Michael, in Louisville, Kentucky. And they were an acupuncturist and an aromatherapist, respectively. And so I was doing Qigong with them at 6:00 in the morning in this warehouse, and we were doing Tai Chi in the park. And I was at their clinic most of the time, just hanging out, helping Christine make different creams and balms and all kinds of stuff, and just being in proximity. For me, for so many of my teachers, it's been really being in proximity to them, not in so much like formal study, but to just be around them. And then like the random things that they talk about, in the kitchen, it's like, whoa. And so they were very excited because they had gotten this new translation of the I Ching. And this is it was a collaboration from a woman named Hannah Moog and Carol K. Anthony. And they had done this translation of the I Ching using the method of consulting the sage, where you're throwing the coins to get hexagrams, to build the hexagrams that way. And they had actually inquired to the sage, which is the consciousness that is behind the I Ching, because the I Ching is this ancient Chinese divination oracular book. And it has a consciousness, as all oracular technology does. But so they had actually asked this sage if the translations that had been done prior were what the sage wanted them to be. And in a lot of the places, because, the Wilhelm Reich version is the one that's the most common translation that people see about the I Ching. And nothing wrong with that, but it was done in a time where it was, feudalism in China was a very strong program. And so they actually inquired about that with the sage. And so there's a lot of rectification that happened to the translations. So anyway, long story short, they were very excited about that there was this new, more aligned translation. And so they were throwing hexagrams every day. And so then I started doing that, and then, got the book myself. And so was really kind of working with I Ching every day for quite a long time, probably for a year and a half. And so that was, there was astrology, and then there was this study with the I Ching, and then astrology came in more, actually even in between that, because it was in 2012 when my mom was starting to get into human design, and she's also a projector. And she was like, oh, we have to wait for the invitation. And I was like, that sounds awful. And so I was not into human design. And I had heard the stories about this kind of militant character who was kind of questionable, who was the person who brought through human design. And I was like, I don't know if I want to get into all of that. And so one of my friends, Adam Apollo, was really into the gene keys. And so then I got the book and I started studying the gene keys around 2012. And it's just been this thing that's been in the background of my life. And then, human design started to gain more and more popularity. I actually went to Burning Man with Erin Claire Jones in 2015, and then watched her really blossom into her human design career. Had readings with her. It was really her description of what it means to be a projector and wait for the invitation, that she explained it in a little bit of a different way. And I was like, oh, okay, like I could actually be all right with that. So it was just this thing that I was kind of into. And then in the summer of 2020, all of the stuff about anti-racism and COVID was, wow, like the internet in 2020 was a very kind of scary place to be, trying to make money and promote yourself and be like, I have these amazing things. And the cancel culture was like, And so I was very, very much not self and I had been acting like a generator, a manifesting generator before that, because I had nothing else to go off of. It's very difficult, at least at that time it was, to know that you're a projector and to know that there's a different way that you're supposed to do business.
And so before we get into astrology then, so that we have a little more context to this, would you mind explaining what these energy types are? And of course, so this is human design. So what is being a generator? What are the energy types? I guess like since we're talking about human design, we can just go into that one if you want, so that people that are listening, I would love for people that are listening, and if they've never heard of any of the systems before, to have a basic understanding so that they're also speaking the language. Because even myself, like, I'm like, okay, I know I'm a projector, but I'm not quite sure what all the other energy types are and they're meant to be doing. So I would love to know a little bit more about that so I can also understand it fully.
Well, really it is, so human design comes out of many different systems. And so, it was originally brought forward by Ra Uruhu, who was a man who was at the time living in Ibiza. And he had this mystical experience. And basically, he had been a very well to do businessman and had walked away from his entire life and ended up living on the island of Ibiza in a ruina, which is this ancient type of dwelling that doesn't have much to it. And even at one point, he was living in a tree. And so he was quite a radical character, but he had this mystical experience where he came home. And there's a lot more detail to this story, but he came back to the ruina one evening and he could see a light underneath the door, and there was no electricity. There was no, he was concerned that what is this light? And he opened the door and his whole vision was filled with this light. And there was a voice that said, "Are you ready to work?" And for 8 days, he received the transmission of what we now know as the system of human design. In the beginning, it was called a design of forms. And because the form is the human body. And that's human design can be quite a heady kind of a system. It can be very complex. There's thousands of little rabbit holes to go down. But really, its core intention is to reorient ourselves to our bodies, which is something that I really like to emphasize. And so the form is called the body, and so it was originally called the design of forms. And so it's this system, this system that was brought through by this voice that, that's how he calls it, is the voice. And so it was pulling from a lot of different systems. It pulls from astrology, it pulls from the I Ching, it pulls from Kabbalah. And so there's a lot of different, it's even genetics and all different kinds of things are combined into human design. And so for me, when I came to human design, again, it was, after burnout. I had an extraordinary burnout at the end of 2020. And it wasn't until, and I just kind of limped along. I had a coach who was a manifesting generator, and it was I was just kind of limping along in my business in 2021. And it wasn't until 2022 when I met Amy Lee, and she taught a course called The Projector Way. And it was just so eye-opening and really, really changed my life. And that was when I decided I'm not going to, because I've been intellectually studying human design since 2019, but I was I'm really going to go into this, and I'm going to start making some very radical changes in my life, because nothing else has worked. I've tried the sacral way of being in business, and it's just not for me. It's obviously not working because I was so burned out and exhausted for so long. So in the energy types, well, and I'll just kind of close that whole circle there. So for me, it felt like that going to the systems of human design, astrology, and the gene keys felt very organic for me because they had been part of my life for so long. And so it felt like another layer of my own remembering that was actually all within this lifetime. And so I was pulling from when I found the astrology book in my parents' closet when I was 17. And I was pulling from, studying the I Ching when I was 24. And I was pulling from, learning about the gene keys in 2012. It was all of this, felt like all of these pieces were finally coming together. And I was like, oh, like this is very exciting. And I could really see how my design was being resourced in working in these systems so much more than my work in the Lemurian school. And so that was why I decided to close that, complete that, and step away. And that's the end of a 7-year cycle. A lot of times at the end of a 7-year cycle, we have to change things and complete things. So to the energy types.
But thank you. Thank you for giving us all of that context too, because I think that it makes it shows how practical the systems can be too, right? Because it's because of the systems that you were able to kind of like re-engineer the way that you were living. So when you do connect with the systems, you understand them, you feel them. I think that that part that you highlighted, that the systems are meant to be felt in the body, which is really the way that we can understand, feel, and know our truth, is really what matters and what really is so relevant about this system. So I think that was important. So thank you for sharing that. So now what are the energy types of human design?
Yeah. So most common is the generator or the manifesting generator. Manifesting generator is actually a subtype of the generator. And so these are beings who, when you look at the body graph, which is, when you enter your information into a human design website or app, you see this image that has 9 centers. And so when you have the sacral center defined, that would mean that you are a sacral being, that you are either a generator or a manifesting generator. And so these beings have access to primal creative life force. They have a lot of energy. They're really designed to do whatever it is that lights them up, that they can use that energy that they have to create things, to do things, to make things, to build things, that they are so, I always say it's like you want to have like a chef kiss at the end of your day. You're like, that was an amazing day. And they're designed to use up all of their energy. Like they should be done, like exhausted, not, burnt out, but, like they should feel like I'm really ready for like, oh, I'm going to sleep really well tonight, you know? And of course we can get it. There's lots of different nuances. They're designed to respond to life, but that would also always be predicated by their authority, whether they have emotional authority or they have sacral authority. But that's about 70% of the population. So most people have sacral definition. And that's also the program. Like, we're conditioned because there are so many beings that have sacral definition. That's the predominant energy on the planet. So then when we go into the non-energy types, like you and I, so there's projectors. And so projectors, so they do not have sacral definition, but they can have any other kind of configuration. There's more subtypes of projectors than any other subtype. And so then you have manifestors. And so manifestors have some type of throat definition. And they don't have, again, nobody else is going to have that sacral definition anymore. But they have throat definition. That's why they're able to initiate things. And so manifestors are designed to initiate, they're designed to get things going, they're designed to inform, like this is what I'm going to go do. And then going back to projectors, so projectors are here to guide. They're here to be invited. And it's important for them to follow their authority, and with all the different subtypes of projectors, you have emotional projectors, you have splenic projectors, you have self-projected projectors, mental projectors, ego projectors, and all of them have different authorities. And so your authority is always going to be how you make decisions, and it comes from your body instead of your mind. And then we have reflectors. And so reflectors are beings who don't have any centers defined. And they are really here to they're here to be the observers and to reflect and to really, like, if there's anybody who has any real authority to pass any kind of judgment on what's happening in the world, it's the reflectors, because they're here to be those guides, where they're here to really reflect on what is appropriate in a space and what's not appropriate in a space, what's healthy in a space and what's not healthy in a space. So that's like super brief.
I mean, they are so complex, these systems, that it's hard to just give a little basic foundation, because like you said, there's so much nuance to every single profile. And just out of curiosity, before we started the conversation, I gave you my my information so you could see my profile, and you mentioned that I have an undefined ego and an undefined something else. I can't remember. Can you explain a little bit of like what that means in the chart?
So in the human design chart, there are 9 centers, and this is really an evolution of the chakra system. We were in prehistoric times, we were 5-centered beings. And then we evolved, literally mutated, and lost our tails, and and then I don't know if that's exactly on the timeline, but we became 7-centered beings, and then we mutated and we shifted again, and that was many, many hundreds of years ago, and we became 9-centered beings. So this is and we're on our way to becoming 12-centered beings, and there's a whole shift that is in store for us ahead, coming in 2027. At least it's going to start to begin in 2027. So we have these 9 energy centers, and they are, loose. They have some of the same names as some of the chakras, and some of them are more connected to, like, the spleen is, the name that we have for an organ, but this is an energy center. So based on where the planets were when you were born from your birth chart, and also based on where the planets were when the sun was 88 degrees before what is your birthday. Basically, in human design, you have 2 birthdays. You have the one that you know about when you took your first breath, and then you have the one that you know about as your astrological birth chart is for your personality. So this is who you think you are. And then when the sun was 88 degrees, and it's not necessarily, sometimes it's 88 days, and it's like I made the mistake of, in the beginning, trying to pull my design birth chart by just taking the same birth time from my birthday and just subtracting 88 days, but that's actually not correct. So I just want to, anybody who's like, like me, and like wanting to like get into all the things, you need to have the exact design birthday, which is usually calculated from a human design app. So you need a more advanced one to do that. But anyway, so you have a design birthday and you have a personality birthday. The design birthday is the design of your unconscious and of your physical body, while the other one is your personality and your conscious self. When these 2 birth charts are combined, because they're held together by what's called the magnetic monopole, all of the different 64 gates are all of the different places. They're little numbers inside of those different 9 energy centers. And so based on where the planets were on your birthday, your personality birthday, and your design birthday, they're going to fill in, they're going to define certain of those gates. And when you have one gate that is defined on one side of where there are 2 energy centers next to each other, and you have another gate that is defined, they complete that channel, and those 2 centers are filled in on your body graph chart. So that's where all of that comes from. But when you have centers that are what we call undefined, where maybe you have some hanging gates, right? So there's maybe some of those gates they have definition, but they don't make the bridge. They don't connect. There's nothing on the other side that connects them to the other center. That's what we call hanging gates. And those centers are called undefined. But then when you have centers, like in your case, your sacral and your ego center or your heart center, that do not have any definition, there's no gates, so there's no planets that were in those particular gates when you were born, those are open centers. So for you, for example, right, so you have a totally undefined sacral. And so it really means that it's kind of like, if you had any hanging gates in there, it would at least give you some kind of understanding about how sacral energy works. But without any kind of definition there, it's really kind of like you have no kind of point of reference about like, how does sacral energy work, and what is it like when it's like you just keep going and going and going and going, and you don't know when enough is enough. It's kind of like there's no point of reference for that. And so it can be a place where you can become very, very wise, and that's part of how you guide and help people, is by helping them to understand when enough is enough, and to not overdo it, not to push themselves, not to burn themselves out. And so then on the other hand, it's also, for your open ego or your open heart center. And again, the heart center doesn't have anything to do with the actual heart. It's not connected to that, our physical heart. Well, in some kind of sense it is. So to have a totally undefined ego is to really have kind of no point of reference around worthiness, and around kind of like, what does it mean to feel like you have to prove yourself in order to prove that you're worthy. And so again, it's like, if you had some hanging gates in there, you would at least have some kind of understanding about how that might work. But it's really kind of like, when there's nothing there at all, it means that, you're very, on one sense, you're kind of protected, because there's nothing that can like link that up. It's going to take much more to define for someone else, or for the transits to define your ego or to define your sacral. But it really means that it's also like, for anybody who has an undefined ego or an open ego, it's really that you're not here to prove yourself. You are already worthy. And any time that your not self mind tries to get you to make a decision, right? In your case, it would be that, your not self mind would try to convince you that you need to overwork or overgive in order to prove yourself worthy in any kind of a situation. So for you, whenever you notice yourself doing that kind of unconsciously, it's like, whoa, let's take a step back, let's reorient to the body, right? Because in your chart, you don't have any definition in those centers. And so that's not something that, of course, those centers exist in your body, but it's not something that it's like how you're supposed to live your life. For you as emotional authority, you're supposed to make decisions according to your emotional wave.
I think that it's so, you are describing the last 3 years of my life. And I guess it would be helpful maybe to put it into a practical example. So for 7 years, similar to you, for 7 years, I had a company, and I was just feeling like, when is like enough is enough? Like, when is the stop to this? Like, I work constantly. I even loved what I did. Like, I really liked creating what I created. But I was like, there's something about this that is just not exciting me. And part of the way that the company grew was through social media. And social media was a huge part of like having that ego identity of like, I'm posting something, people are liking it, it's being validated. And I hated that so much. I hated it. And I think, if I'm understanding correctly how you're describing this undefined energy centers, how I can read it and what happened to me was basically, one, the first thing is that I was I was just feeling that there was nothing that was grounding the reason why I was working so hard. Like, why am I even working this hard? Like, I didn't understand it. So like, now that you're saying this, I'm like, oh, that's why I didn't understand it. I didn't have any type of like point of reference, and it just simply didn't feel right. And my body, to your point, was always exhausted. It was always tired. And the other part of that was that, to me, when I started to analyze the way that I became this identity through what I was seeing, or how I was being validated in social media, I was like, I hate this too. Like, what's the point of this? Like, why? It's unnecessary. I don't need to be validated. So I think this is kind of like a practical, like in real life experience of how these energy centers are manifesting in the way that I perceive and I relate to life.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's such a, the not self world, we can call it the matrix, we can call it the Maya. But, the not self world is what, everybody is living in. Like, this is like, our reality, and so, I mean, it is literally designed to profit, like literally. Capitalism functions based on people not being themselves, and making decisions with their mind instead of making decisions from their bodies, even for generators, it's like, the classic example is that you have someone who is a sacral being, a generator, a manifesting generator. They're going to a job that they don't like, and they're using that precious generative life force energy just because they have the capacity, that they have that energy, that they can do those things. But it doesn't mean that those things bring them joy, right? That they end up going home feeling frustrated instead of satisfied, right? It's like the ideal for a generator or a manifesting generator is to come home and be like, chef kiss, I'm going to sleep so good tonight, right? And then, for those of us who are, not sacral beings, it's like, Ra talks about that the sacral beings are slaves, because it's like the matrix or the Maya, the program wants to use their life force energy to fuel the modern industrial complex. And that comes at the expense, then they get burnt out and they get frustrated. And then for the non-sacral beings, for projectors, manifestors, and reflectors, everybody else, because they don't have sacral energy, they have those centers either open or undefined, they're amplifying that sacral energy. So then you talk about, the projectors, they're the super slaves. And so, right, because they don't have that energy, but they think that they do. And so they have no idea when enough is enough. And so they're overworking and overdoing and staying up late. And, and especially in the entrepreneurial world, it's like when there's no clock to punch in and punch out of, it's like you're taking your laptop to bed. And so... But it really is draining and burning out everyone. And so that's why it is so, so, so important that's why human design is really having this expansive moment, because people really realize that there is something to it.
Yeah. I've heard you talk about, and this is going back a little bit to the Lemurian topic, but I think it's connected to this, because I've heard you talk about how the frequency of Lemuria really celebrated the individual beings, right? Like being authentic, I guess, right? Like being very authentic to who you are, and individuality, just being who you are, exactly who you are, is really what was celebrated. And with these systems, ideally, this is what we're using them for, right? What I want to bring to the table here is like, and I want to hear your opinion with some of these systems, how I felt before in some cases, is that by learning this let's say, traits of personalities and like the way my energy works and all of that, a lot of times I could find myself being very limited or really programming myself to be a certain way when it's not actually benefiting my expansion or growth or whatever it is, and instead is limiting my experience as a human being. So how would you advise someone to use these systems in a way that really influences their expansion and growth instead of limiting them? And I guess after this, we can go a little bit more into like astrology, because I feel like astrology especially is one that with the personality types can do this.
Well, I mean, I kind of want to go there first.
Yeah, let's do it.
But, I mean, because, I mean, when you talk about, in astrology that the personality types can limit us, you're talking about the sun sign?
Well, that's kind of like one aspect to that, right? That we have such limited knowledge of what astrology really is that we get trapped in like one explanation or one of those signs. And we think that's who we are and that's it. And then we justify our actions based on like, oh yeah, that's because I'm a Taurus, for example.
Well, I mean, I think for all of this, so the answer to both of your questions, the one about like, limiting our, the system making us feel limited because, you're a Cancer or whatever. And also, with human design, like, how can that be really like liberating and expansive to be yourself? I have to say that, so really, like, whenever you're beginning to dive into, if you really want to resource any of these systems, one or several or whatever, you have to go below the tourist level. And so you can't, because that's what, astrological tourism is like, oh, well, I'm a Taurus, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, I cannot do that because, I'm a Gemini or whatever. That's because you're on the surface, because when you really go into the system of astrology, right? It's like, well, that's because my Mercury is in Sagittarius and it's, conjunct Neptune. It's like there's such a much more full, you are so much more than your sun sign, and you're so much more than the big three, right? Your sun, your moon, and your ascendant. You're so much more, it's the house placement, it's the angles, it's the conversation, it's the transits that are happening, it is. I mean, astrology is a very dynamic system when you actually resource it in the fullness of what it, like, that's like, what it's meant to be resourced for. Instead of just staying on the surface and just like learning astrology through memes, and it's the same for human design, because it's like a lot of people like, oh, well, I'm a projector, this and that, or like, oh, well, that's because I'm a generator, this and that. But type, is tourism human design. It's the tourist version of human design. And so it's like, to go down, so it's like not only to know your type, but to know your profile, and then to go deeper into the centers that you have defined, and then to know the not self voices of your undefined centers, to know your authority, to know the channels that you have, to know what the circuitry is that's connected to those channels. And, to go into the substructure, but to go into your variables, right? Because that's going to inform how you eat, and that's going to inform the environment that you place yourself in. It's going to inform how you view the world, and it's going to inform what motivates you. And so it's a very, very, all of it is a very dynamic system. They're all dynamic systems, but in order to really resource them for the liberation that they are meant to provide for us, you have to go below the surface. You cannot just being on the surface and knowing that, you're a generator or you're a manifestor or you're a projector or whatever is not enough. It's not enough. It's not, even knowing your authority, it's like if you're a generator and you know that you have emotional authority, it's not enough. Like it's like to receive the liberation, because, so for me, it's like, astrology was my first language, besides English. That was my first language. And so coming from studying astrology for 25 years, and then coming from the contemplative path of the gene keys, and so in astrology, it's the the metaphor, the metaphorical, the mythic, the symbolic realms, and being able to interpret your life as a dream, and to recognize that jury summons that you receive in the mail as not a jury summons, but Saturn. Like, oh, I just received a letter from Saturn. Okay. Or the policeman that pulls you over, right, is not, some, person who's having a hard day and taking it out on you for going 5 miles over the speed limit, but that's Mars. Like, oh, hi, Mars. Maybe I should, are you hungry? Maybe I should work out. Maybe I should do a workout routine to make sure you feel nourished. But it's still very kind of nebulous, even if you have a good grasp of astrology or gene keys, it's still, to me, kind of nebulous. But when we bring it together in human design, it's like, oh, here is the practical application. Like, this is how it actually manifests in the lived experience inside the physical body. And so that's why it's like, I feel like that synthesizing, which is also one of my channels, I have the channel of synthesis. So that's, part of how this is appropriate for me. But synthesizing the systems of human design, astrology, and the gene keys, to me, it's like looking in a three-way mirror. And so when you look in a three-way mirror, you can see way more than if you just looked in one mirror. And then they inform each other, right? Because of what you see through one mirror shows you things in the other mirror that you couldn't see before. So yeah, it's like it's meant to be so absolutely liberating. It's meant to give you permission to be yourself, but it also takes enormous amounts of courage, and it takes it's like, really, it's like when you want to be yourself, when you want to unhook from the program, it's literally like that scene in The Matrix where they have to do this whole mission and they have to get in and infiltrate through the machines, and then they're like pulling out these tubes and everything. It's like unhooking from, it literally is like that. And you have to be ready that it's like not everybody in your life is going to be on board with you unhooking from how things have been. And, people are going to fall away in your life. Relationships are going to change. And there's, I always talk about that. It's like, and I talked about this for Remembering Lemuria too, that it's like, on any spiritual path, like the thing that people don't talk about is the part where you lose your friends. But when you can, have the courage to withstand the deconditioning process that takes 7 years, by the way. When you come out on the other side, your business is you. It is how you are meant to function in the world, not how you've been told this is the 6 steps to success, or, 6-figure, blah, 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 whatever. There's no program. There's no formula or recipe for you being yourself. It's like, so when you get out on the other side, it's been this kind of harrowing purging process, but the people in your life want you to be yourself. The clients, the customers that you have, they want you to be yourself. They actually benefit from you being yourself. And so it is absolutely liberating, but it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. I think that it's like you said, it's the software that we need to upgrade, right? We've been operating with this software that is already up, it's out of date. And we need to change it. And there are so many different modalities, and we can even add here like therapy, right? Like psychotherapy. All of these things are ways in which we can do it. The way that I see this system, specifically astrology, human design, and gene keys, is almost like the codes, right? Like if we were building a program, you have the codes and like the people that know how to do the coding so that that program looks in a certain way and it has an interface and it has a language that everyone can speak. This, to me, the systems are kind of like those codes that certain people, if they go deep into this, then they're able to translate it to others. Just similar to hiring someone to create your website, right? You go to the person that does the code, and that's you, someone that understands those systems to a degree that you know those nuances. There's a lot of exploration that we can do on our end. Like for me, for example, someone that is just curious about these systems, I can go in and do my exploration, but it would be kind of like irresponsible. And that's how I feel in many ways. And this is why I brought up this feeling that sometimes I get about being limited by what I learned from these systems. And I think this is coming from this place, is because I don't have the knowledge of understanding like the language completely. Again, like a coder, someone that is creating websites. So it would be irresponsible to rely on the little bit of knowledge that I have of these systems to actually start programming my new software, because it's going to be incomplete. It's not going to be proper for me to run from that incomplete software that I'm installing for myself when it's like not enough information. I guess this is coming out of nowhere. I don't know. Someone is guiding me to say this. But yeah, I guess this is how I feel sometimes when we really adhere to ideas that are incomplete, and then we justify our actions because I'm a Taurus, because I am a projector, because all of these things. And I love that you're here reminding us that these systems are supposed to be extremely liberating. And yes, the process is going to be hard. And at the level of the body, neurologically, there are so many things that are happening that it's actually painful. The brain needs to rewire for all of us to update the software. So I think it's beautiful that we have people like you that can guide us and can compassionately give us this direction. And before we start to wrap up, anything briefly that you want to share about gene keys, because we didn't really talk about it much. What is this system? What are like the basics of this system?
Yeah. So gene keys came out of human design. Richard Rudd is the man who brought forward the system of gene keys, and he was actually working with Ra, and he actually was very, very into the human design world. At one point, Ra actually gave Richard the copyright to human design, the rights to human design, and asked him to make a school in the UK. And he did that. And this is from an interview that Rick Rubin did with Richard Rudd, which is wonderful. I'll definitely recommend that. And then Richard ended up, so the school was formed, for human design in the UK. It was very successful. Richard ended up having his own mystical experience where the gates of the human design, because there's these 64 gates, which are all the numbers inside of the centers, where they expanded and, began to teach him in new kinds of ways. And he began to see that, and this is really, so the gates are coming from the hexagrams of the I Ching. And so, in the I Ching, there's a general description for each hexagram. And then there's also 6 subdescriptions for all of the lines of the hexagram. And so Ra had actually brought through something similar that's called the Rave I Ching, which is the human design version of the I Ching. And so Richard, what he brought through that we know of as the gene keys is not quite the gene keys I Ching, because it doesn't talk about the lines. However, in all of the 64 hexagrams that are what the gene keys evolved from, there are these different kind of levels where you move from the shadow frequency to the gift frequency to what's called the siddhi frequency. And it's not a city like New York, it's a SIDDHI, which means an enlightened state. And so really, and and then there's the hologenetic profile that is the gene keys kind of version of the body graph, or the astrological chart. So it's this visual that you can get when you enter your birth information into the gene keys software, and there's different paths that move through there, and the more that you study human design, you can recognize some of those correlations, the planets that are in those places that correspond to, your life's work or your evolution or your radiance or your purpose. That's the activation sequence from the Gene Keys system. But I again, it's like I really love kind of blending them all together. Just for example, whenever I sit with someone in a session, one of the first things that I really like to, and I like to explain how they all weave together in a more detailed kind of way. But it's like showing them their sun sign. So like they're like, okay, so for you, your sun is in Taurus,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so your sun is in Taurus, and what do you know the degree?
No.
Yeah, I'm forgetting the degree right away. But basically what happens is that whether you're talking about gene keys or you're talking about hexagrams or you're talking about gates in human design, when you take the 64 hexagrams and you take them out of the grid that they're usually in and you put them in a circle, they all line up with all of the different astrological signs. So the fact that I don't have your birth chart here in front of me, I have your human design chart, but I can see that your sun sits in the second gate or the second gene key. I happen to know that that's in the sign of Taurus. So that's why I asked you if you were a Taurus sun. So for you, right? So it's like when we look at the body graph chart, it's that the second gate is actually at the bottom of this kind of diamond shape in the center of the body graph. That's what we call the identity center, or sometimes it's called the G center. And so your sun is sitting at the second gate, which is the very bottom point of that diamond. So even it's like you could touch this place on your belly that is right below the end of your sternum, right where your ribs are coming up. That's where that kind of resides, like somewhere kind of around in there. And so that's your Taurus sun. And then if you knew what house it was in from your birth chart, you could be like, okay, so this is my Taurus sun, and it's right here in my body. And it's shining this light of all of the energy of Taurus that is beauty and value and creating beautiful things on the physical material plane, and really feel that, like, right. And then to take whatever house that is in your birth chart and to be like, okay, so that's because everybody who has their sun in the second gate is always going to have a Taurus sun, because that's where it's lined up with. But for everybody, it's going to be in a different house, right? Because that's based on your rising sign. So everybody, you may have somebody who has the same birthday as you, but it's in a different year. So their sun is shining, in the 9th house. And, so that's part of the energy that's shining out there for you. And for them, it's like, in a different house. And so then like maybe that's in the 5th house for them. So then that's shining the light of the Taurus energy through the 5th house there. And then you take the gene key description. So then you take the gene key, right? So the second gene key is the great yin hexagram. It is the divine feminine. All of the lines are what we call broken. That doesn't mean they're incapacitated. It just means they're not straight or they're not complete. There's a space, you know. It's like you take three equal signs and you stack them on top of each other. And that's what the hexagram of your sun looks like. But it's this great yin hexagram. It's like the womb of no thing. It's the divine silence from which all sound arises from. It is the supermassive black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy that's giving birth to stars. You know, it's like there's so much poetry that is woven into the gene keys. And those are your solar codes, right? Like that is what, you know, the light that you are here to shine out into the world, and part of what your soul wants to create that you could feel proud of, you know, is something very, very creative, but also very beautiful, that creates a lot of value, that makes, you know, increases your self-confidence and the confidence of other people. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, fully. And this, I mean, even though you're talking a little bit more focused on my chart, I think that this also describes what it could feel like for everyone else when they are following this energy centers that are guiding us, and they're showing us the way that our soul really wants to express itself in this lifetime, right? You're talking about creating beauty and value, and although these are traits of my specific sign and also my gate, right? This is the main gate of the gene keys. It also sounds like it's relevant to everyone else, right? Like beauty in every specific way. It has so many different expressions, but ultimately that's the idea of the systems, right? So that people can create something that they're proud of, that they create beauty for themselves, however that looks like, that they create something that they value, however that looks like. So I love that somehow my chart also brings back, like, or shines on others in a way that this is how we're supposed to feel. We're not supposed to be feeling tired all the time and dreading doing stuff and competing with each other and with the planet and with everything, right? It's really supposed to be more of a harmonious way, which is ultimately why the name of this podcast is The Way of the Heart, because I do believe, and I truly believe, that we are meant to be more harmonious, you know, live in more harmony. And I think this, again, is something that the systems are really here to help us with. So thank you so much, Rakai'el, for your time, for your energy. Is there anything else that you would want to add before you share with us where people can find you, and maybe anything that you're offering right now?
My biggest prayer is that, you know, everything that there was some part of what we shared here today that was a little golden carrot that would inspire you, make you a little curious to, you know, dive deeper into any of these systems, so that you can, you know, really liberate yourself, and that you can become, you know, have the courage to know how unique and how beautiful and how special you are, and to have the courage to live your life as yourself and not as who you've been told you have to be. Because that really is the, you know, liberation, you know, insight, the revolution, you know, is being yourself. And so I hope that somehow that this was supportive, it was empowering, that it was helpful for you in some way.
Yeah, I will join in that prayer and that intention for every single person that is listening. Thank you so much again. And where can people find you?
So my website is my name. It's rakaiel.com, Rakaiel.com. I have sessions available most of the time. Sometimes I take a break, but I have sessions available, and I have different classes. We're just finishing the solar codes. I'm actually feeling something new coming up. I feel like it's going to be something for projectors specifically, and really helping them to really dive in and learn the language, learn the system of human design. And I'm really excited to teach that in kind of a new way, because I felt like for me, when I learned human design, it took me a long time to get it because of some key connections that were missing for me. So I'm excited to teach through that lens. I also do sound healing. And I offer new moon and full moon ceremonies. And so there's a membership for that. And there's also an astrology membership where I do audios for the new moon and the full moon and different astrological events that are happening. So there's different ways in which you could tap in or connect or and then also on Instagram. So I'm on Instagram. My handle is I am Rakaiel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rakaiel. Thank you. And for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us, for your time. And we really hope that, like Rakaiel said, something out of this conversation is giving you the courage to follow the way of your heart. There were so many things that I wanted to expand on while Rakaiel was talking, but I knew that to begin with, we had a really broad approach to this conversation, because when someone is an expert in so many different things, it's really hard to narrow it down to one topic. I am learning as I go, and I'm really hoping that we can have a second conversation. There are so many different things that perhaps in this conversation were new to you, and they were new to me at some point. And initially, when there are new things that kind of like break the mold of our reality, it is hard to take them in. If anything, I would say when I first started to dive deep into these subjects, I thought it was just very unique and interesting. It was like almost like a story that I was listening to, like a fiction book, that I later found that there are so many things that have personally happened to me and I've experienced within these topics and these subjects that it is hard to think that it is fiction. So I really hope that you keep an open mind and an open heart, and I will see you in the next episode.